Hello everyone, Cujo here. I thought I'd put together a compilation video slideshow of our recent spring break trip to Arizona that we took in our Bonanza. Normally we would take the airlines for a trip like this across the country. This time, however, the airline pricing was over $4,000 for my family of four. So for less than half of that, we could pay for fuel and even hotel stays if we split the trip into 2 days each way using our Bonanza. So that's what we did. So we packed and got ready for our adventure as a family. The wife made some in-flight snacks for us, personalized, and the kids were somewhat excited as well to go on this family adventure. In terms of flight planning, first I plotted out the overall trip, which was a distance of over 1,350 miles going on the south side of the Rocky Mountains. And that would be over 9 hours of flying time. I wanted to keep the legs between 2 and 3 hours long to keep everybody in the plane comfortable. And also, there are some weight and balance challenges with the F-33A where I wanted to keep the fuel level fairly high throughout the trip for ballast because of the aft CG tendencies. This weight and balance plot shows something close to what our initial weight and balance departing Chicago looked like, and you can see we were pretty far aft and definitely needed to keep the fuel as high as possible uh, to keep it from moving too far aft. And then by the end of the trip, on the return side, we really learned how to pack better, lighter. We shipped some stuff back, and the weight and balance looked quite a bit better. So this is how you pack an F-33 with a family of four. The answer is very carefully. Okay. I shouldn't claim to know actually, but so we tied up our heavy bag, well, anything we could, right up against the seats to minimize the weight aft. And we also have stuff in the footwells. Well, not the pilot footwell. And the kids will hold a bunch of stuff too. So taking that into account, I set the first stop as Kansas City, followed by Amarillo, Texas, then El Paso, Texas, right before crossing the high desert, and on to Chandler as the final destination. I decided I would do an instrument flight plan for each leg, except for the leg between El Paso and Chandler over the high desert and some higher terrain. I would do that VFR with flight following just to give myself a little more flexibility. For the first leg, I planned on using the OBeam 3 departure to take me to Kansas City downtown airport. Unfortunately, the weather in Chicago was not great that morning. It was snowing with low overcast, below 30 degrees, and so we waited it out. The ceilings were slowly rising throughout the day, and instead of getting out very early in the morning, we ended up departing about 10:30 a.m., which did set us back a little bit in the overall plan for the day. But we just forego the instrument flight plan initially. I did not want to fly through the clouds due to the freezing conditions. So we did a little bit of a scud run west VFR, starting out at about 2,500, gradually climbing. And once we got out to Moline and the Quad Cities, things had broken up pretty good, and so we were able to pop over the cloud deck VFR through a hole, and then pick up our instrument flight plan over the Quad Cities. During the first portion of this trip, the kids were a bit apprehensive, but once we crossed the Mississippi and got closer to Kansas City downtown airport, everybody was in much better spirits. And Kansas City downtown airport is actually quite nice. That was my first time there, and I would highly recommend it. I'm looking forward to getting back myself. So after some cheap fuel and a quick lunch, we repacked the plane and headed out, trying to recapture some of the time we lost from our late departure. This next leg was pretty straightforward, and the weather was perfect. We filed the Wildcat 5 departure out of Kansas City downtown airport towards Amarillo, and they cleared us direct pretty quickly, and everything was pretty smooth. As we flew further west, the terrain started changing. There were some dry-looking lakes and different farmland, and all in all, it was pretty smooth as we arrived in Amarillo. And the people at TAC Air were very accommodating. We got there late in the day, so we called it a night and started fresh the next morning. After a nondescript night in Amarillo, we planned the next day, which was a pretty direct flight over the Roswell area and down and around some restricted areas and into El Paso. That morning, the kids were raring to go. They were excited to complete the journey that day. The flight was pretty smooth, actually, but I have to say there's not a lot to see in the New Mexico area and western Texas. It's pretty just, I guess, rugged high desert terrain. Some of it you might as well be flying over Mars. There's not really signs of life uh, anywhere. You get some interesting looking mountains and terrain at a certain point in the flight. And I'll say El Paso was a really nice airport. Enjoyed our short stop there, and Millionaire FBOs are fantastic. I was pretty impressed, and I'll probably try to stay at or stop at Millionaire FBOs in the future. For the next and final leg of the trip to Arizona, we would be going VFR over the high desert at 10,500 feet, and we would be using oxygen as a family. I got a four-place oxygen specifically for this section of the trip, and it's not oxygen altitudes necessarily, but I wanted the family to be comfortable. It was a warm day in probably the upper 70s leaving El Paso. The airport itself there is about 3,700 feet. So with density altitude, I figured it was probably about a 5,000 foot departure. So I was concerned about our heavy weight and the, uh, the high elevation. So I was very cautious. I'll say at El Paso is a very busy airport as well, which added a little bit to the stress level. But they were really accommodating, and I've never been told I needed to taxi faster before, but I did get that instruction, and a regional jet blew past me on the taxiway like I was standing still, um, and they kept me going. But again, they were very accommodating. I was not familiar with the area, and there was high terrain right after departure that they helped me work around. And overall, it was an interesting experience. Once we got to the Phoenix metro area, it was quite busy, and parking at Chandler was tricky with all the hundreds of planes tied down. But we found our spot, we got everything tied down, unloaded, and we started our vacation after that first half of our adventure. And we did some nice hiking, spent time with grandma, and overall we just enjoyed the nice weather, which was a lot better than it was back in Chicago. The kids enjoyed seeing new places, taming lions, seeing their cousin, who we hadn't seen in a while. It was all in all a very nice trip. At one point, we were able to make it down to Tucson and visit the Pima Air and Space Museum, which I would highly recommend if you haven't been. It's got to be one of the best aviation museums in the country, and they have just about every military plane ever made. The kids pretty much enjoyed it, although they were too hot in the desert, but they enjoyed their Blue Angels stuffed animals. For the return trip, it was mostly a reversal of what we did to get there. Uh, Given that we had learned how to pack better and that we hopefully would have a little bit more of a tailwind, I tried to stretch the legs a little bit more than we did going out. So I changed the stops to first Roswell and then Wichita, and then the plan was to go direct to Aurora. For the first leg, we would do 9,500 again with oxygen, pretty much retracing our steps, although we would overfly El Paso and go to Roswell. Now that we were pros at flying cross country, it was a little bit more of a relaxed trip back, so we were lucky enough to get some camera footage takeoff. Rewatching this video, it does seem like it takes a long time for the airplane to get off the runway. It was a heavy plane, and the Arizona area was heating up, even though it's relatively early in the morning. But everything was good, and the climb rate was actually quite decent. So we departed the Phoenix metro area to the south-southeast and took the opportunity to get some video of the high desert. The GoPro was actually working, which was good. The family had a decent amount of room and was pretty comfortable with our oxygen flying at 9,500. The terrain wasn't terribly interesting. It was okay, not super scenic. Took some footage of the panel during this leg of the trip. The performance was good. We were doing about 165 knots ground speed with a little bit of a headwind. We're doing about 170 or more true airspeed at about 13 gallons per hour. As we got closer to Roswell, the terrain got drier and it generally got windier, and the kids got more tired. And I was interested in stopping at Roswell, not only to visit with the aliens, but also because I had read that their very long, large runway was originally used for the B-36 bombers. Of course, the B-36 bomber was a huge bomber during the Cold War with 6-piston engines and 4 jet engines, and I thought that was pretty cool. So we went ahead and landed. There were a lot of parked planes there, probably still from COVID. Uh, and I opened up the cowling to try and cool off the engine to make the restart easier. This next leg was a relatively long leg compared to the others. I filed an IFR flight plan, and between the very warm weather and wind, it was very bumpy. It beat us up pretty good. The family was generally not very comfortable, and I found myself throttling back a bit just to make the bumps a little bit easier to manage. We eventually made it into Wichita's Eisenhower Airport. I did plan to stop at bigger airports along the way, this one included, because of the amenities and services they offered. The Yingling Aviation was great, and we were lucky enough to get a nice hotel right down the road from the FBO with a Texas Roadhouse in the parking lot. So the kids were happy. It was a nice overnight stop. And the next morning we got up. It was a nice, crisp, clear day, perfect for flying the final leg of our trip, which would take us back over Kansas City and hopefully back into Aurora. Unfortunately, it was snowing and overcast back home. So we enjoyed the flight over, which was smooth and perfect. But as we got closer, it was concerning that the ceiling was not rising as the forecast had predicted. Once we got into the Chicago approach area, the low ceilings were still in place over the Chicago area, so we diverted briefly to DeKalb, which was VFR, and we only had to be there for about an hour, and then we made it back into Aurora. I went in with an IFR approach, although it was starting to break up at that point. Everyone was excited to be home after our week-long adventure, and we would do it again. It was a lot of flying. I needed a break after that trip, but I'm definitely looking forward to doing it again, especially next time we'll have the IO 550 in the plane.